Welcome to episode 60 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's December 30, 2000. We are in Rio de Janeiro, at São Januário, and Brazilian football is about to collide with a truth it always knew, but often tried to ignore. A packed stadium is not just atmosphere, it's risk. Tonight is supposed to be the second leg of a national final, Vasco da Gama versus São Caetano. And what follows isn't remembered for a goal or a trophy lift, or a tactical masterclass. It's remembered for barrier giving way, people falling, a match abandoned, and a championship that ends up needing a third game because the second one could not safely continue. Today on the pod, we'll explain what the Copa João Havelange was and why the 2000 Brazilian title carried real weight. Tell the story of how a giant like Vasco and a modern underdog like São Caetano ended up in the same final. Revisit the first match, the 1-1 that set the fuse. Go deep into what happens on this day, December 30, the collapse, the stoppage, and the immediate aftermath. Then close the arc with a third match, the replay that finally crowns the champion. And land on 3 takeaways about football culture, stadium safety, and the thin line between myth and disaster. To understand why this final mattered, you have to understand what Brazil is doing in 2000. If you know Brazilian football, you know that Brasileirão is supposed to be the annual national championship, the league table that anchors everything else. But in 2000, Brazil's domestic season detonates into a governance crisis. The result is the Copa João Havelange, a top-tier championship named after its federations and FIFA's long-serving president, and a championship that exists because the sports institutions could not agree on the normal format in time. And a powerful club coalition ends up organizing a competition that still needed to function as Brazil's championship. And it matters because it carries real consequences. The tournament's top finishers feed into continental football, Copa Libertadores qualification, so it isn't a friendly workaround. A title in Brazil is never just a title. It's status, legitimacy, and a line in your club's autobiography that gets argued about forever. And the matchup itself tells you why this tournament is still remembered. On one side, Vasco da Gama, real royalty, a giant stadium, a massive supporter base, and a squad built to carry expectation. A club that does not exist to have a nice run, it exists to win. On the other, São Caetano, a club representing something newer and more disruptive, an emerging force with less historical weight, but enough organization and momentum to punch through the old hierarchy. The kind of finalist that makes traditionalists angry and romantics excited, because underdogs don't just create upsets, they expose how fragile the established order can be. So by the late December 2000, Brazil has a final that feels like a clash of football identities, institutions versus insurgency. And the first match, the one people often forget, already shows you this final won't behave politely. On December 27, 2000, the first leg is played in Sao Paulo, at Palestra Italia. São Caetano strike first, and suddenly the giant is on the back foot. Then Vasco responded through the one name that, in Brazilian football, always carries gravity, Romário. Yes, that Romário, of toe-poking fame and part of Cruyff's dream team in the first half of the 1990s. It ends 1-1, which is the perfect first-leg scoreline for tension. No one is safe, no one is finished, and both teams can talk themselves into believing the second match will belong to them. Vasco fly back to Rio, knowing something simple: win at home, lift the trophy. São Caetano fly to Rio, knowing something equally simple: survive the noise, and the pressure shifts. And then comes December 30, 2000, the night that becomes the real story. São Januário is a venue built for emotion. It's intimate, it's loud, and when Vasco are in the final, it becomes a pressure chamber. The match begins, but early on something changes in the stands, crowd movement, crowd compression, people pressing forward, and then a barrier gives way. People fall, others fall onto them, and in a moment the thing that football sells as romance, bodies packed together and noise and urgency, flips into panic. The match is stopped around the 23-minute mark. Players are pulled away from the chaos. The pitch becomes a staging ground for triage, medical staff, stretchers, urgent movement, an atmosphere that no longer resembles sport. And here's the part that matters for listeners who feel the dread in that moment. Reports from the event consistently note that there were many injuries. The numbers vary by source, but there were no reported fatalities. Hundreds didn't die. A tragedy did not become a catastrophe. People were hurt, surely, and some seriously enough to require hospital treatment, but the night is remembered as terrifying and traumatic, not as a mass fatality disaster. You will see different injury totals reported, roughly in the 150 to 160 range, which tells you something important about chaos events. Early counts fluctuate. Hospitals update numbers. Minor injuries get treated and go unregistered. Some people leave and report later. But the core truth holds. Many were injured, and the game could not continue as if this was just a disturbance. Even the idea of restarting begins to feel surreal, because once a crowd incident reaches that level, football stops being entertainment, it becomes public safety. So the match is ultimately suspended. A final is left unfinished on the night it was supposed to define the season, and the immediate question becomes, so what now? Brazilian football can't simply declare, well, that's that. This is the national championship. A champion has to be crowned. So the final bizarrely grows a third match, not because the two clubs wanted a trilogy, but because the second leg could not be completed. And that third match matters because it's part of the story that restores football, while quietly showing how shaken the system really was. January 18, 2001, the deciding match is played at the Maracanã. The ticketing is controlled. Capacity is capped. There's no casuals show up and squeeze in. In other words, the infrastructure changes immediately because Brazil has just been reminded what overcrowding can do. And the match itself plays like a release of pressure. Vasco start aggressively, like a team trying to end a haunting. Juninho scores. São Caetano equalize because this underdog is not here for sympathy. Then Vasco hit back quickly, and later Romario adds another. Vasco wins 3-1, and with that, the championship is solved on the pitch rather than in the courtrooms and boardrooms. But even in victory, the emotional center of this story doesn't sit with a trophy. It sits with the abandoned match, the images of panic, and the reality that football culture, when it treats crowding as tradition, eventually meets physics. So what should we take away from the João Havelange final chaos? Well, 3 points, as usual. First, the football match is only the visible layer. Beneath it is infrastructure, barriers, crowd control, maintenance, ticketing discipline, emergency response. When those systems fail, the game cannot carry the weight of the crowd safely. Second, home advantage has a cost if it's built on compression. A roaring stadium is a weapon until it becomes a hazard. The line between intimidation and danger is thinner than fans like to admit. And third, football history is not just what happened on the ball, it's what happened around the ball. The João Havelange Cup ended with Vasco lifting a trophy, but its defining memory is the night the final stopped being sport and became an emergency. On this day in 2000, São Januário didn't just host a match, it exposed the risks inside Brazilian football's most intense rituals and forced the championship to reinvent its contract with its crowd and to find its ending somewhere else. That's all for episode 60 of OTD, the João Havelange Cup final, the night it was suspended, the third match that finally finished what the second couldn't. If your memories of that era in Brazil, the chaos, the atmosphere, the feeling of Brazilian football at full volume, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. And do rate us 5 stars, subscribe and tell a friend. It's a rough world out there, and we need all the help we can get to climb the charts on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to this podcast. Tomorrow, in episode 61, we'll talk about the cult of the unlikely goal scorer and the chant on New Year's Eve in 1994. I was there when Jensen scored, and the folk heroes fans love forever. John Jensen, Jimmy Glass, José Luis Brown, Albino Friacha, Santos Idiata, and more. See you then.